Good morning, everyone. Here, John, your host of the Prepared Mind channel, and I have to say, good early morning to you. Let's talk shit hitting the fan, shall we? When it does hit the fan, it's going to be a shit show. It's going to be a mess. There's going to be a lot of trouble out there. So, why is that important for us to think about? Well, you know, we want to plan. We want to be ready for this. We want to not suffer, let's just call it the bulk of the consequences that are negative. It's early morning, California time, and wanted to get this video out because it's important. And I'm going to put a link down below, or I'll have the admin put a link down below for what I'm referring to. And I'll get to that. But, you know, we talk about a lot of different ways that shit is going to hit the fan. You know, it's going to be the power's out, or there's no fuel, or there's no food. Right? We're going to have political turmoil. And the other one is economic turmoil. And I do spend an awful lot of time looking at economics. Because let's face it, men wouldn't join the military if they didn't get paid. Men wouldn't be police if they didn't get paid. Politicians certainly wouldn't run for office if they weren't being paid and they weren't being offered bribes, handouts, junkets, and whatever it is that politicians need to keep doing the jobs they're doing, right? Which is basically screwing all of us over. So, economy, financial stuff, money is a huge factor in all of this. In the world we live in, everything is based off of economic activity. It's power. It's liquid power. Money, gold, silver, all that stuff. So, where am I going with this today? Well, in the past, we have had enormous financial concepts change. That is, a paradigm shift in money changes. And when that happens, we're visited by the ghosts of the four horsemen, right? What are these ghosts? What are these four horsemen? Well, you know, war, famine, pestilence, that sort of stuff. So let's take a look historically at what we had trouble with. The American Revolution. We can start there. Essentially, that had to do with what we believe now to be freedom, but it was economic. There were blockades on Boston. The people were overtaxed. It was financial in nature, which led to military action, shit hitting the fan. They don't call it, or we don't think of it as an SHTF event, though, because back then people would earn an income. They would barter, they would trade, they would get food, and they would store food all the time. Ammunition. They would do all the things we talk about with food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, all of that. To the extent they could, they did. Everyone was a prepper, whether you were in the country or the city. You did everything you could to make sure you could get through to the next year. So, that was a shit-it's-the-fan event, even though it's known as the American Revolution. The next one we get to, the next major one, I should say, is the War of 1812. That was fought because the United States of America decided it didn't want to borrow money from the Bank of England anymore. It was a financial war. There was an attempted change in the flow and ebb of money, taxes, trade. It was a trade war again. Let's fast forward, if we will, to the next SHTF, the Civil War. Here in America, it's called the Civil War, the war between the states, the North and the South. It was an economic war. On both sides of the war were the English. That is, they were funding both sides. It didn't matter who won. They wanted to be able to profit, to benefit by their support. When talking about playing both sides to the middle, the North and the South, they were at each other's throat, so to speak. The North was demanding the South send their cotton north. for processing in northern textile mills and then being shipped with that value added to Europe. And the South was saying, we're being offered more money by European countries, businesses, to buy our raw, unwoven cotton, so why should we sell it to you? Started the war, shit did hit the fan in a big way. Infighting between who gets to control whose resources and whose what? Right? Whose rights? It was a war of rights. But shit hit the fan. At the end of it, there was a problem with greenbacks, and Lincoln took a bullet to the head. You know, and it's much more complicated than that, and I'm just kind of running through this. But again, shit hit the fan. If you don't think the Civil War wasn't a shit hits the fan event, that is, life as we know it, or as they knew it, was completely changed. The landscape changed. You've got armies stomping around. You've got a disruption in the supply of food. Back then, they had oil for lighting. They didn't have electricity. They had oil for light. Right? It was a mess, complete mess. So let's step forward again, shall we, and find the next episode of Shit Hitting the Fan. World War I. It was an economic war, once again. The world was being divided up. Allies were being chosen for each side. You had the East, you had the West, and you had the South. Basically the Ottoman Empire down there. You had three empires vying for domination of the world economic system. That is, who controls it, who benefits the most by it, who controls the flow of money, the value of goods and services, etc. It was a giant war, World War I. Another shit hits the fan right after that was the Weimar Republic in Germany. After the whole fucking mess of World War I, the Germans were blamed for it. The Germans were blamed for it, and they had to pay reparations to everybody. They were left in absolute shambles. A continuing SHTF situation. Hyperinflated currency. Right? Their gold was taken. You know, the whole thing was messed up. Resources being delivered. What could they do, right? Shipping stuff out. They had a good industrial base, and they kept working with that. That's what saved their bacon. But ultimately, they were so dissatisfied and so oppressed that caused Hitler, right? Hitler was funded by some American bankers. I'm not going to mention their names today. And the rise of the Third Reich occurred, which preceded the next shit hits the fan event, World War II. Once again, it was an economic war. The Germans were pissed. They wanted their gold back. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted a lot of things. Conflict. People chose sides. We had the Great Depression. That's an economic shit it's the fan event. And there we go yet again. So I think you're probably seeing the pattern here between economic warfare and physical warfare, and the pyramid being completed by shit hitting the fan. So everything after World War II was relatively calm. We had the Cold War, which kept everyone busy and scared to death. We had the Korean conflict, the Vietnam War. Those weren't shit hitting the fan events, though. That was just, we could call them major skirmishes, and yeah, a lot of men died on both sides. Men were killed, and corporations made lots of money selling wartime supplies. But not shit hits the fan. Now, let's go to the early 70s. Nixon's president. There's a problem with national debts. There's a problem with the currency system. There's going to be a major collapse. They didn't know what to do with it. They ended up pulling us off of the gold standard so they could inflate the money supply. That is, borrow from the future to pay for things today. Because the Treasury had been exhausted at that point. Now, I'm glossing over a lot of facts, but I'm pointing to some issues. What they did was they stalled economic collapse. They changed the system. They changed the system from a gold system over to the petrodollar, right? And oil, energy became what the dollar's based on and what the dollar's valued in and what oil is traded in. It was very well married together. There was a major change, though. Major change. Now, if you look back at the 1970s, you'll see this thing called the energy crisis. That was, if your license plate had an odd or even number at the end of it, you could only get fuel on certain days because there were lines around the blocks. That is, there was an oil shortage. It was fabricated. It coincided with this change to the petrodollar. You want to talk about trouble? Back then, yeah, people got in fistfights. They punched each other. They were pissed off. It caused economic disruption. It caused social disruption. It caused political disruption. Fortunately, we didn't go into a shit hits the fan event. They were able to stall it well enough and kick the can down the road, and they did change the world economic system. And the U.S. wasn't the only country that suffered, but they did stall. They stalled it. And economic shit hits the fan, which would have led to another war, a war for energy. So who came out on top? The United States came out on top because it was the industrial superpower of the time. It was the GDP, the most wealth being generated, created at the time, compared to all the other nations. Minus the Soviet Union and the Soviet nations or communist nations. So where do we go from there? Well, since then, since switching over to the petrodollar, the United States has run massive deficits. And I'll try and put a link to a chart in the video to show how the deficit grew after switching off the gold standard and where we're at today. The chart makes perfect sense. Borrowing from the future takes care of today, but it guarantees your future destruction. So here we are in 2018. They have again 2008. Let's just back up to 2008. I recall Hank Paulson threatening Congress, if memory serves me correctly, with the potential for martial law and blood in the streets, and I'm paraphrasing, if Congress didn't vote for the TARP money, the bailout, that is the United States government paying off companies that were too big to fail. Meaning those companies shouldn't be allowed to fail, even though they failed to do their job. They did the same thing the government did. They're leveraging their money. They're hyperinflating things. Right? At the beginning of the petrodollar, gas was $0.25 a gallon. Where's it at today? That gives you an idea of inflation. Anyways, and here we go again. So 2008, they stalled, just like they did in 71. Shit hitting the fan economically. That is a collapse by making a change. 2008, the change was governments, and not just the United States, but around the world, working in conjunction, in coercion with the central banking systems, whether it's the European, American, Japanese, it does not matter. Even the Chinese, they would begin printing money, quantitative easing, just flooding their nations with capital in order to keep them afloat. That is borrowing from the future at greater and greater levels. Once again, what does this guarantee? It guarantees an economic shit-hitting-the-fan event, and there's going to need to be a change in the system, and this is key here. If the system we're operating under does not work, we're going to need to make a change. Change is always visited by conflict and strife. Sometimes, as in the last two times, they've stalled it, and we've just had a severe economic downturn. And often those do lead to war. But while you're in that severe economic downturn, there are pockets of SHDF. There are very unhappy people. There are people who cannot make it from one paycheck to the next without going absolutely broke and being forced to beg, go to soup kitchens. Now, one other thing the governments have done compared to the old times to new is they've developed a great welfare system. Government soup lines without the lines, that is EBT cards. You know, they've got a card. They pull their card out. You know, I don't have one, but I need a prop. They pull their card out and they stick that in a machine, right? And it gives them food. Where's that money come from? Comes from the government. Where do they get it? They borrow it from the banks. Who pays it back? You and I. But it keeps the system going. They're kicking the can down the road. And you're probably wondering, John, you fucking prattled on for over 15 minutes. I'm getting there. Today is January 8th, 2018. On January 18th, 10 business days from now, there's going to be a change. There's going to be a change. We may or may not feel it right away. Because our currency, our money that we use today, is based on faith. And faith comes from an understanding of certain facts. Right now, we believe our money has value because we believe our money has value. On the 18th, the Petro, not dollar, which is the system we have now, but the Petro Yuan, which is the Chinese dollar, for lack of a better word. US dollar, Chinese dollar. Every other nation in the world right now, because of that 1971 agreement, has to buy treasury notes or dollars from the United States in order to conduct business internationally. It is the currency that is used to settle debt between nations, specifically for oil or energy, which is the lifeblood of everything. Without energy, you've got no movement. Without oil, we go back to people walking around cart and horse. So oil or energy makes the industrial world work to the scale it needs to work. Everyone has to buy dollars so they can then use those dollars to buy oil. That system is coming to an end for the United States dollar. There's going to be a transition, a bridge from the dollar to the yuan, and it starts on the 18th. I don't know if there's going to be a hiccup, a guffaw, a yawn, but to date, everyone has just said, that's poo-poo, it's bullshit, right? That's conspiracy talk, it's alternative news, hoo-ha, right? We've heard all this before. Those people, the Chicken Littles of the world, the sky is falling, you better go get a bunch of freeze-dried food and bullets and hang out. Those guys are crazy. Well, they've been announcing it for a long time now. It's been in the works for years. I ran over and discussed the gold, the purchasing of gold by nations, the purchasing of gold by central banking systems, because they're going to need to back their money on something besides people's belief that it has value. They need something with real value. And they're developing that right now. And they're going to slowly implement it because they don't want absolute and utter chaos, or all of the infrastructure, all of the systems of control and government, that the people in charge, the powers that be, they will lose that. Now there's people like the Clintons who, if they lose power, they'll just blow everything up. Fuck it. What do they care? They just lost power. And then there's people who go, well, we've got some power, we'd like to maintain it. And in order to maintain it, we need to make a smooth transition from the dollar over to the Petro Yuan. It looks like that's where we're going. Now again, everyone's saying, oh, no, you got the Petro dollar for the West and then the Petro Yuan for the East. Really? If that's what you think the dollar, the people backing the dollar are going to like competing in a fair market? Sounds like capitalism. We haven't had that in quite some time. Fair market. If the yuan is backed by more than just faith, maybe gold, maybe GDP, maybe industrial growth, maybe assets, hard assets, real assets, commodities. Don't you think people would tend to want to accept it more than the US dollar? We've got a change coming. We've got a change coming, and people are going to be uncomfortable when they discover this. I don't know if it's going to be day one, a couple of weeks, a couple of months. I have a feeling it's going to be a couple of months, and it's going to become obvious that there's a major problem. We are already having our own financial major problems on the U.S. side of things without this change to the Petro Yuan. Without the change, we're having problems. We could have a collapse regardless of the Petro Yuan. And there's a lot of discussion of that. Collapse meaning stock market revaluation. They love sanitizing the terms. And then they can turn to the American people and say, we're going to have our own version of austerity here in America, which means increased taxes, decreased benefits or government services. But this idea that the Petro Yuan is a fallacy, is a red herring, it's not real, it's a lie, it's bullshit, it's conspiracy talk. It's proven itself because of the mainstream news is beginning to introduce it. And they were talking about doing it by Christmas. They're a little bit late. It's January. That's not very late at all in terms of business and business cycles, which work in years and decades. They're a couple weeks late, but they have their system and they're ready. They're ready to start trading, and nations are going to start buying Chinese yuan and bonds from China. Who's making everything today? Cell phones, televisions, automobiles. You know, here in America, we see American automobiles, and we think that the whole world has it. No, the whole world doesn't have American shit anymore. The world is getting their shit from other countries, and China is a huge industrial powerhouse that is manufacturing more than just children's toys these days. Tractors, durable goods, right? Appliances. Everything you use in your world, China has, and they make for the rest of the world. You know, we have our trading partners we like to work with: China, North Korea, Japan. You know, there's manufacturing around the world, but China is a huge powerhouse. And it was predicted they were going to overtake and pass the United States. What do you think is going to happen in the United States with this Petro Yuan? Now, if it causes a serious disruption, which I think it will, I'm predicting it's going to, we are going to face shit hits the fan light at the very least. And if shit is hitting the fan in your neighborhood, you can bet your ass you're going to think it's the real deal. Whether it's rioting, looting, absence of law enforcement, absence of the appearance of law and order. Well, it's very real at that point. You don't need anyone to tell you shit has hit the fan. You're living it. Once again, the conspiracy guys have been proven right because the powers that be have been letting everyone know this is coming. They've been letting everyone know. There's two reports you'll read in the news. That everything's fine and the look out, shit's gonna hit. And they're both mainstream as well as alternative. Right? The status quo guys want everything pushed down the road to help maintain this idea that everything's fine, this belief system in the dollar. And then there's the other side, which has been revealing the Chinese yuan. We're going into a time of great change. We could end up embroiled in a world war, regional wars, as we have in the past, as described from the American Revolution, Second Revolution, 1812, Civil War, World War I, the 1920s boom and bust, World War II, the stalled and averted 1971 crisis, and the stalled and averted 2008 crisis. And here we are, just a couple of years later, 2018. Basically a decade later. They kicked the can down the road, and now we're going to see the change. There has to be change because the other system can't stay up. If you think that we're going to go through this smelling like roses, you need to put your nose back on the back end of the horse and take a good whiff of the shit that we're going to be dealing with. Look at your history and then understand economics and economic cycles. Think past the last decade or your own lifetime and look at how economies come and go. When the government's broke, they're going to stop giving welfare cards, soup line cards to people because they won't have the money, or they'll be without any real value. People are going to be hungry. They're going to be scared. They're going to be cold in the winter and overly heated in the summer. The income disparity between the poor and the uber wealthy is going to cause massive civil unrest. It always has. Take a look at the French Revolution and the French SHTF. The disparity between those who had absolutely nothing and the wealthy who had everything was so apparent in France that they took their king, stood him up on a platform, put his head in a guillotine, cut it off, and then lifted his head to show the people, to placate the people, to let them know that that type of tyranny, financial, economic tyranny, was over. Unfortunately for the French, they didn't replace that system with a very good one, and they ended up having several more revolutions. But that being said, right, that's what happens when the people get out of control because they've been denied, because they've been oppressed. We're going to see a stage of perceived and real oppression. Right now we're being oppressed as fuck, to use a quaint expression. We're being oppressed in a way that people have never been oppressed before. And I'm talking about in the United States of America. Severely oppressed with taxation, with low wages. Real wage growth hasn't occurred in over 20 years. But because of our standard of living, energy, petrodollar, Petro Yuan, because of our dominance with energy, our standard of living has been kept high. Even for the working poor, even for the destitute. And by destitute, I mean people who I go, how the fuck did you make it through this year making $15,000 and having rent and kids and everything else? It's incredible. But when you take away that purchasing power of the dollar, because it's the petrodollar, and it sinks so far, it's barely visible. It's barely visible. When it's up here normally and everyone else is down here, we're going to be potentially reduced to, what, something like the Mexican peso? Could it be that bad? Yeah, it could. The point is you need to get ready. You need to get ready now. You need to have food, water, shelter, clothing, medicine, means of self-defense, and a plan. You need those in line now because it's coming. January 18th marks the official kickoff day. They've done all their testing, all the computer systems, all the internet systems. The testing is over. It is now time for implementation of the Petro Yuan that will compete with the dollar. The dollar the sun is setting on. It is the rise of the Petro Yuan. If the dollar was so strong, why is it sinking? If the dollar was so strong, why does it need to have a replacement? It's not strong. The dollar is very weak. It is going to collapse and crumble before our very eyes. Get ready. Do your homework. Listen to the experts, and you will learn. Maybe I can put this another way. Prep or don't prep, but don't prep at your own peril. Prepping, buying food and defensive measures and medicine, turning your petrodollars into tangible goods can't hurt you because you can always eat the food, drink the water, sell the guns, consume the medicine, wear the clothing, live in the house. Right? And the plan is invaluable. So you don't prep at your own peril. But mark my words, the Petro Yuan is here. It's coming to a town near you. It's coming to the world economic system. And it's going to cause ripples and then tidal waves of change. The question is, what do you guys think? Am I wrong? And I'm wrong about a lot of little things. But the overall direction we're going, the question I always ask is, today when you woke up, are we closer to shit hitting the fan? Or are you closer to sunshine and daisies and good times? Every week, more things are pushing. More things are pushing us towards the shit it's the fan event horizon. I'm hoping for shit it's the fan light. I really am. I'm hoping for that. Because I don't want full-on Captain Caveman, Mad Max, shootout, Wild West craziness. We might avoid that, but any way you look at it, it's not going to be a pretty scenario to deal with. You guys be cool, and I got more for you tomorrow. I'm waiting for today's future events to play out. Okay, I want to say Godspeed to everyone. Chance favors the prepared mind is yours.